OnlyFans has gone bankrupt. Let's talk about it.
The media space has been dominated by how much some top earners are making on OnlyFans. But what hasn't really been discussed is how the company has lost billions of dollars in valuation in a very short amount of time.
And also how much morals and ethics and values our women of this generation have lost when this is the problem with streamers as well. Everybody assumes streamers make so much money, so people try to become a streamer, and then they realize, oh, I don't have enough to make it. I'm not as charismatic. I can't do it. And 99.9% of people who stream make less than minimum wage or $0. Now, here's the problem. A girl goes on an OnlyFans and they fail. Okay, they could just quit, but guess what? Now all of their friends and colleagues have seen their asshole for less than the Fortnite Battle Pass. So that is why you must explain why doing OnlyFans is so dangerous and never worth it.
And things just got even more messy because is now in a very bad situation after the CEO passed away. So essentially you have one of the biggest platforms in the world, especially when it comes to that profitability per employee metric that you've probably seen online.
Yep.
And they just lost the one person running it, and almost nobody knew who he really was and that he existed. So the dude never gave interviews.
Out of curiosity, was the guy who owned OnlyFans, was he Jewish? I don't want to assume he was Jewish. That's a coincidence, guys.
There's really no real footage of him online. And one of the only pictures of him online was the one from his LinkedIn that had no ties to the platform whatsoever. So that's a little bit interesting. But for years, he was quietly making billions running one of the most controversial platforms on the internet. But then in just the last month, he passed away and left the entire business in limbo. So, I mean, to catch everyone up to speed here, OF was created in 2016 by a guy named Tim Stokely. He was the youngest kid in a family from Essex, England. And he spent years trying to launch internet business after internet business and had a whole lot of failures. And the guy burned through a whole bunch of his own money and goodwill from friends and family, to put it lightly. But his dad, Guy, real name by the way, he watched multiple projects go essentially nowhere and had funded more than a few of them. So
well, yeah, because OnlyFans was originally a non-pornographic site. And then once it became a pornographic site, they tried to hide it, but now that's the only thing that OnlyFans is known for, is porn. Nobody else goes to OnlyFans for anything else.
Tim came back with yet another idea. He went, okay, here's 10,000 pounds, and that's the last one I'm funding. Little did he know though, that money became the seed funds. And the original structure was simple. Creators set a monthly price, subscribers paid it, and the platform keeps 20%. And I guess the creator walks away with 80%. Tim's original pitch wasn't necessarily focused on adult content, but the idea had been open to anyone who could build a paying audience, including adult creators, since 2017. And from the start, it was a family operation in the early days, with Tim's brother, Tom, running the operations and their father, Guy, handling the finances. Guy, I guess, was just their guy and father. And that one group, I guess they figured out the model faster than anyone else. And that showed up in some serious numbers, because in 2018, the platform was gaining traction, but running headfirst into some structural problems. The payment processors that made it possible to, actually collect the money from the subscribers weren't a big fan of the adult side of their business. And obviously,
the adult side being the 99% side of the entire thing. Unfortunately, yeah, that's their damn fault for doing that.
No payment processing.
And they need to just go full swing into it, because nobody's using it for anything else.
Means no business, full stop. So Tim sold it. And the buyer was someone that almost nobody had heard of, and nobody would really hear of him for many years to come. His name was Leonid Radvinsky, who was born in Odessa, Ukraine in 1982. His family relocated to Chicago while he was still a kid, and he studied economics at Northwestern University and graduated in 2002. And from that point forward,
I'm not going to celebrate this guy's death. I don't like doing that. However, when your entire legacy, when your entire existence was to peddle the idea to minors that when they turn 18, they can become porn stars and become millionaires and fill their ideas with such grand delusion, I'm not going to say that I'm surprised that you died an early death due to karma. It's a disgusting existence this man had. Not celebrating his death, but I'm not surprised by it.
Essentially built an entire career at, scaling internet companies while keeping his name almost completely out of circulation. And even after he became the owner of one of the most talked about platforms on the planet, a single photo of him made the rounds, the same one over and over, which was attached to a LinkedIn profile that described him as the president at Leo.com. and, completely left OF out of the picture. So essentially what we know about this guy is he lived in a $19 million waterfront property in Miami, but he gave 0 interviews. He made no public statements. He was, I guess, for every practical purpose, someone who did not want to be found. What he was always doing, however, was running his own things, and he'd been building internet businesses since he was a teenager. And by his mid-20s, he'd built and operated more than 10 websites, developing a deep understanding in, I guess, the mechanics of adult content or entertainment and how that whole payment structure works and how he can get that to work without getting banned. And since he understood how this industry worked, when he was presented with the chance to buy, he did so in 2018 for $30 million. And it's safe to say that
The fact that that cost him $30 million for a platform that pretty much didn't exist until it was pornographized is very impressive to me.
that was a phenomenal investment for him, because in 2019, the platform processed around $300 million in total payments and cleared around $7 million in profit. Then a year later, that gross payment volume hit $2.2 billion. Then by 2021, it was approaching $5 billion. And none of these numbers were being announced, but the company
COVID created a lot of very lonely men, as well as the decline of women and the quality women that exist in the world have also created a lot of porn addicts and men. And that's the truth. There's so much brainwash that have convinced this generation of women to just be massive piles of shit. I'm not really surprised when men turn to porn, because it's the only way they can have sexual satisfaction, because the idea of actually going out and finding a partner is near impossible these days. It really is.
files with the UK as required, but Leonid had no interest in turning any of these numbers into some massive press release like many other entrepreneurs would. But then came that moment that probably told you more about OF than anything else, because in August of 2021, the platform announced that it was going to ban explicit content. Now, that was confusing to a lot of people, because that kind of sounds like if Burger King announced it was going to stop selling burgers. So why would they ever do that? Well, it makes sense a little bit later on when you get the full picture. But
I think it was kind of like they were attempting to create a Streisand effect, where they were saying, yeah, we're taking away porn from this platform. And then everybody talk about what's on that platform, how it can't exist. And then say, never mind, it was just free publicity. I really think I think it was a marketing ploy. Absolutely.
obviously, the response from the creators on their platform was immediate and very clear. So 6 days later, the ban was reversed. And I guess that just showed the creators that they're the product. They actually have the power here of this platform. Because at the end of the day, the platform cannot exist without the creators and the consumers paying for
Absolutely.
it. So the reason all this actually matters becomes a whole lot more clear once you look at the numbers, though. Because in 2024, they processed $7.2 billion in total transactions between the fans and the creators. OF's cut of that was about 20%, and that came out to $1.41 billion in net revenue. That is a behemoth of a company. But after expenses, pre-tax profit landed at $684 million, with the entire operation ran by only 46 full-time employees.
Crazy.
That is insane.
That's
and then
crazy.
Leonid's personal payouts track the platform's growth as you would pretty much expect, because in 2021, he collected around $284 million. In 2022, he collected $338 million. In 2023, he collected $472 million. And then in 2024, he collected $701 million, which
God.
works out to about $2 million per day every day for the entire year, which means the total earnings pulled between 2021 and 2024 were just under $1.8 billion from a company that he paid roughly $30 million for. That might be one of the best investments of all time. But at the same time, the distribution between the creators is
all of that money, he enjoyed it for 3 years, and then he died at 42. Rip Bozo, you know what I'm saying? Like, that is rough. Making all that money and then dying at 42 is insane.
wildly uneven, because, you have this whole notion where a bunch of people would start an OF and make a whole bunch of money. But for the most part, that's not true. It's very similar to how Twitch is in a way. I don't really like drawing comparisons between Twitch and but you have a handful of top streamers on Twitch that make a crazy amount of money.
I do the exact same parallel. It's completely fine. It's the exact same business structure, only instead of selling porn, you sell parasocialism.
and then the average streamer makes way below minimum wage. And that's the case with as well. But I mean, that's just a whole nother topic for its own. But the thing is, by 2025, Leonid was looking for a buyer. And it didn't take long for him to realize, selling this platform is going to be a challenge. Because on paper, I mean, the investment is insane. Over $1.4 billion in annual net revenue, profit margins that most businesses would consider borderline unbelievable, roughly 380 million registered users, and fewer than 50 people on payroll. If you strip the context and handed someone the financial statements, they would assume they were looking at some sort of tech unicorn that had figured out everything. However, the context is the biggest problem here, because a large portion of the institutional investors, the ones with the actual capital to do a deal at this scale, they operate under something called vice clauses, which are restrictions embedded in their agreements with their own backers that prevent them from putting money into certain categories. Because often, I mean, these firms don't only use their own money, they have liquidity providers or people who invest money into them, and they operate as a hedge fund, and then they deploy other people's money with the end goal of, beating the S&P 500 in an annual return. And a lot of people just don't want their funds to go into,
S&P 500 is something that people invest in for like one of the most safe, reliable investment stocks that exists currently on the market. For anybody who doesn't know what that shit is. But it sounds like the back end of OnlyFans is getting really fucked, which means a lot of people who sold their life to prostitution are going to be unemployed very soon.
Investing in these vice businesses, which considers adult content, tobacco, gambling, and weapons. So regardless of the numbers, a lot of the most obvious buyers are essentially blocked from even writing the check. Then you have the operational risks, which are, Visa and MasterCard. They've already shown that they could, threaten to cut off payment processing for adult platforms. And this is exactly
which I really hope they do, not just to fuck the people who have sold their soul to pornography industry, but also to help release the vice grip that pornography holds on the young man today. Because pornography is poison. And it's one of the hardest addictions to kick, because it's almost like a victimless addiction until you realize it's too late. And now you can no longer have consistent sex with the woman that you love. And it takes forever to fix. And it's a very hard addiction to kick, it is. And I'm sure there's many people in my chat who would say that they have a porn addiction 100%. If you look at porn every day, you are heavily addicted. And it's a shame, because not enough people want to talk about it because it's embarrassing.
what pushed OF towards its failed 2021 ban. And since the platform is almost entirely reliant on subscription revenue, it has to go through payment processors that take somewhere between 5 to 10% in fees on top of the 2 to 3% fees from the most regular, Visa and Master, which is far above the usual 2 to 3% that most regular businesses are charged from payment processors. So obviously that is a tax on their margins, and now they're dependent to payment processors. And not only that, but there's also a regulatory pressure. So the UK communications regulator, they hit with a £1.4 million fine in early 2025 for a weak age verification practice, which, might not be the biggest deal for them financially, but it's a pretty clear sign of where this enforcement is going. And then you have that exit problem, because even if someone bought it, how do they eventually sell it? Like, taking it public through a stock market listing, that's essentially impossible under the current conditions. And there's also no obvious second buyer standing by, and the insane financials don't resolve the fact that this is an asset most people in finance don't really want to be publicly associated with. And I mean, if I was to guess, that might be one of the reasons why they tried to stop allowing adult content on their platform back in,
So if OnlyFans is dying, what are the Twitch women going to do? Well, they're certainly not going to develop a personality. So they'll probably just goon bait and hope for donations directly through the site, and hopefully avoid bans. To be honest, that's probably it.
2021, plus the whole payment processors problem. So the asking price of the platform started at about $8 billion, and no one was interested, despite their insanely high valuation. But the firm that eventually emerged as, I guess, the most serious buyer was Architect Capital, a San Francisco-based investment fund that got its start in 2020, providing credit to Latin American startups. And they had more recently become known for its tendency towards complicated situations, because its founder, James Sagan, was one of the larger investors in Juul, a, vaping and nicotine product that you guys are probably familiar with at this point. And honestly, that's just a whole nother video, because Juul completely took over the world like right before the pandemic, and it definitely did extremely well during the pandemic. And then it seems like it kind of got like banned, at least most of their flavors got banned. And then suddenly you had like Geek Bars and all these other like off-brand versions of Juul, which arguably are worse, that kind of took over everything. But yeah, long story, but essentially Juul had its products pulled by the shelves by the FDA, and they later settled more than $1 billion in lawsuits over allegations that it was being marketed towards teenagers. So I mean, it's safe to say that Architect's brand has some tolerance for risky investments. And the pitch Sagan made to the potential backers,
I think it'd be very easy to show that OnlyFans is marketed to children, considering that every site that women use to plug it is 13 and up. Like, so obviously, Twitch streamers are kind of the biggest pushers of OnlyFans, as well as Twitter creators. And both of those sites are 13 and up. So to say that there's not any marketing to children is a complete lie.
Had two core ideas. First, diversify the platform, push it towards mainstream creator niches, and try to make it competitive with something like Patreon, rather than positioning as purely an adult content site. Obviously, OF is primarily an adult content platform, and the majority of the traffic and subscriptions and the money all comes from that. And without that core, it would just be a minor player when it comes to, like, you know, competing in the space with YouTube, Patreon, and Spotify. Now that Spotify also added long-form content and subscription models. But I feel like might even be smaller than Rumble if they tried to play in the non-adult space. Also, fun fact, since I'm mentioning,
if OnlyFans goes non-adult, it's over immediately. Like, it is completely over. They will be jobless within weeks. Now, they might fall back onto Fansly. That's their only backup plan, but that is where they will go. Then hopefully Fansly will also follow suit.
Spotify. I was kind of forced to make a Spotify because some dude kept stealing my content and re-uploading it to Spotify. So if you want to enjoy my content on Spotify, you can do that as well. I'll leave a link down below so you guys know that it's actually me and not the dude impersonating me. So if you want to leave a review there, that would also help me not get impersonated. But continuing the video, over the years, OF has genuinely been trying to build a safer work community on the platform, including chefs, athletes, musicians, comedians, and fitness coaches. And they all
trying and failing miserably. I have not heard of a single person on there.
Also launched their own safer work streaming service called OFTV back in 2021. And they've actively been trying to pursue other partnerships since. But I don't really think any of it really took off, though that is, again, still such a tiny portion of what actually is. Then you have, you know, the real competitors here, YouTube, Spotify, and Patreon. They don't allow any 18 plus content. And I don't see a world where OF is actually able to compete with any of these platforms in the safer workspace because, you know, the stigma that comes with the name. It's just like, I don't know. I just can't see most creators being very inclined to be like, hey guys, follow my unless they're paid like a massive bag. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. But that,
which, by the way, if OnlyFans were to approach me and offer me millions of dollars to make content on OnlyFans that's non-pornographic, I would absolutely do it just for the meme. 100%. If me taking a sponsor for OnlyFans and making safer work content and that be directly responsible for getting OnlyFans to bar pornographic creators to actually be on that platform, that would be hilarious. I would do that immediately.
Problem will be something the new owner will have to inherit. And another step that they might need to do is acquire a banking license, because even if they acquire OF, what happens if the payment processors shut them off? That would be really bad. So a potential solution for that would be if a platform could become its own financial institution. I mean, in theory, it could. That would definitely be a massive uphill battle for them though. But that would at least help them reduce the 5 to 10% fee burden. Currently, the valuation on the table is $3.5 billion, with Architect taking 60% of the equity in the deal. So in just a few years, it's essentially lost $4.5 billion in valuation because no one wants to buy it. And the Wall Street Journal had originally reported a total deal value, including debt, at $5.5 billion compared to an earlier $8 billion valuation just 1 year before, with slower growth and tougher sale process dragging the number down.
Losing 60% of your net worth or your estimated revenue, or sorry, your estimated worth is not a joke, guys. That is, and that's only now. Like, it could potentially drop even further. The era, and okay, so here's what my opinion is. I believe if we have another Republican president immediately after Trump, OnlyFans is dead. If we go back to Democrats, there's nothing to worry about for these OF whores, right? But essentially, the culture war is decided on the next election, 100%. So praying to God another Republican candidate gets in there.
And this number was apparently dragged down due to slower growth and just a tough sales process. But Sagan's $500 million fund wasn't nearly large enough to cover a deal of this size on its own. So he spent months going door to door trying to assemble the capital. And the family offices turned out to be the most receptive audience, largely because they don't really face the same restrictions that prevent more of the, you know, mainstream funds from joining. And the deal was supposed to close by the end of March of this year. But then Leonid passed away and everything just got way more complicated. Obviously, I don't want to sound disrespectful here, but terrible time. Just when everything seemed to align, he passed away.
Who do you want to win? Rubio or JD Vance? I'm cool with either of them. I don't really care. I know people really aren't crazy about JD Vance. I know Rubio is kind of like the popular one right now, and I do like him because he's a lot more like Iron Fist. But like JD Vance seems very interested in AI, and like I am too. And I think like getting ahead of China and AI is like very important. And I think Vance will take that the most seriously. I could be wrong, but that's what I think right now. And I'm cool with that.
And this happened on March.
Plus, let's be real. If Vance gets in, that's just 4 more years of Trump. Let's just be completely honest.
20th, 2026 in Florida. And the platform made an announcement with a brief statement saying that he had passed away peacefully after a long battle with cancer, but his family asked for privacy and no details were shared. But what came out in the following days were how few people actually knew about how serious his condition was.
Rubio? Me
And
too.
sources told the media that Leonid himself had driven the urgency behind the sale because of his health. Because the guy was apparently trying to get a deal closed specifically because he was concerned about leaving his family in a complicated situation without clear ownership. And as a part of that, in 2024, he transferred his stake of the company into a private trust, with his family being the expected beneficiaries. So obviously, if the deal with Architect Capital was already messy, it just got so much worse. Because the firm was still in the process of raising the equity it needed when Leonid passed. So it seems like the money simply just wasn't fully there. And suddenly now, investors who've been on the fence were dealing with a whole new layer of issues. Now you have estate laws, a different person now effectively in control of the asset, and deal terms that would now have to be renegotiated with a trust rather than the original seller. So the timeline that was already extended was pushed back once again. And as of this video, the deal remains open. And the future of OnlyFans right now is genuine uncertain, which is why it seems like the OnlyFans empire is collapsing. And the company has a current CEO. His name is Kelly Blair, who has been running the day-to-day operations. But what's clear is there's a lot of money at stake, a lot of different interests, and a company that, despite everything working against it, keeps printing cash at a rate that makes it very hard to ignore. So, I mean, it's safe to say whatever happens next will probably not be any more bizarre than the story of this company. I mean, the company's story is how a $10,000 loan from a dad with way too much patience suddenly turned into a $7 billion a year empire ran by some secret Ukrainian billionaire no one has ever heard of. I mean, come on, this is such a crazy story. And I feel like this is just a situation that no one's been talking about, because every time I hear OF in the news, it's about one of their stars making like $1 billion a year.
It's because it's AstroTurf. Sophie Rain doesn't make nearly as much as she says she does, but she's just doing that to fill young women's heads with delusion of grandeur. Everybody knows it, or at least they fucking should. And the other thing is, talking negatively about OnlyFans isn't like positive for public perception, because right now women kind of dominate the internet as well as their crazy simp audience. And so where if you talk about it, you get a lot of hate. And then the moment if you talk about it, you're considered an alt-right grifting Nazi because you don't want young women to do porn, and you don't want your daughters to do porn, and you want women to live respectful lives and actually earn their success rather than just take shortcuts and have everything handed to them. And once their life starts to crumble around them, 35, 38 years old, they're going to realize that they may be millionaires, but they're alone in their mansion with their cat, and they have no husband that respects them, no husband at all, no children to continue their legacy. I don't know a single OnlyFans woman that does not regret it. That's a fact. I have never heard anybody who's done OnlyFans for longer than 5 years who says they wish they never started. And that's the truth. And you warning them is considered evil. And you warning them makes you the enemy, when in reality, you just want what's best for everybody and for women to have more meaningful, more valuable lives. And they'll call you an asshole if you say that.